Hello and namaskar. Welcome to this particular session of this webinar series. As you all know, that Communication has been organizing a series of webinars mostly related to media and society. And in today's episode, we are going to have a discussion, or rather an introspection on the media industry as such, not the business of media per se, but not the content which media sends it as output, but basically the people in media, the labor in the media, the human resources in the media. Friends, we will immediately begin, but as we know that in the beginning there may be a bit slow entry of people. So that's why we are giving a little time for others to actually join. We understand what is the meaning of IST. I'm not explaining for various reasons. So we are just going slow, and we will come to the point in a couple of minutes. But before that, let me tell you that what I was telling you, that this is a series of webinar mainly mooted by Communication. It is a startup of the young professionals. Basically, most of them are pass outs or the present students of journalism and mass communication department of Biswajit University. So instead of going for a job, they have tried to find out an entrepreneurship uh, to remain in the media. And at this point of time, when we are physically disconnected and only virtually connected, they are trying to do some value addition by making this facility available and having organized a discourse regularly on media and various aspects of it, including media and society. And the name of the series, as you know, the title is 100 and Still Counting, the New Life. It is the new life. And today's episode is Trajectory of Labor in the Media Sector, as I was trying to explain, that we discuss about content analysis, we discuss business of media, we discuss technology of media, we discuss objectivity, bias, etc., etc. But today, a unique feature of media will be discussed by a very, very competent person, a media educator, an academician, policymaker, researcher, uh, because this has been the area of his research, the human resources within the media. Let me try to introduce. It is very difficult to introduce Professor Biswajit Dash because I think it would have taken the whole webinar just to introduce him. But obviously, I'll be failing in my duty if I do not, try in introducing himself. He's basically an educator, policymaker, uh, researcher, the head the Center of Media Governance and Society in the Jamia Millia Islamia University. He has been with the AJMK Center, uh, Jamal Kidwai Center of the same university. He has taught in various other universities in India and abroad. He has been a policy maker, syllabus maker, guide, researcher. He has on media and society, social aspects of media, media and sociology, media space, everything is the area of his research. But of late, he has been working uh, a lot on the labor trajectory, as he would like to mention what we understand, the human resources, the people in media. He is with the University of York, in various other US universities. He has been an advisor with the Prasar Bharati and various other organizations as far as policy making is concerned. And as I told you, he has been in the board of, or he is in the board of various other universities in the capacity of making syllabus or research board member or somewhere. And he's a very good speaker, orator rather, and media and society is the subject of his confidence and his research. sociology, media theory, media practices, and media and communication theory, various ways and means, and the nuances of communication as such. Communication in society would be the best word. He's he is related to UGC and various other organizations too. Since he has been doing this research, so we are very happy to have been joined by such a renowned professor, Professor Biswajit Das, the director of the Center for Media, Society and Governance of Jamia Millia Islamia University. Friends, he will be, since he is the expert, he will be deliberating on the topic. But before handing it over, I think I'll be failing in my duty if I do not say from a practicing professional's view that, as I said, that we never discuss much on ourselves, that people in the media who are producing the software or hardware. We discuss about content, we discuss about carriage, we discuss about business, we discuss about our bias, we discuss about our influence, etc. Media and society, impact of media, etc. Ethics, all these things. But who are doing it? Who are the people? How are they? Like, are they full timers? Are they freelancers? Are they contractuals? Or are they just assignees? That project basis, uh, I work as an assignee and I complete my project, and my connection with the media platform gets over. And what is my social security? What is my status? What is my position in the society? The safeguard or the security, not only physical security, not only job security, but social security, all these things will come. And especially when the two major acts like Working Journalists Act or Wage Board Act, and these are the things which are in the process of being repealed. As we know that in our country, four major labor codes are being brought in, so which will replace all individual labor acts. So this is a major innovation in the labor situation. Yes, earlier we had labor beats in the media industries, that there our colleagues were busy in covering labor, industrial relations, trade unions. But now there is not much again. But we said that we are not covering labor per se, not migrant labor, not the position of labor and economics of labor, movement of labor. No, we will straight away go to media labor, labor in media, and its trajectory. But sir, it is over to you. You can discuss anything and everything related to the topic. Over to Professor Biswajit Das, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Am I audible clearly?
Sir,
Snehasis Sur?
sir.
Well, good evening. I would like to sincerely thank the organizing team for the invite, and also wish them all success as young entrepreneurs sort of trying to start startups. And I'm sure that they will go a long way in terms of their venture into this whole media space. Let me also confess at the outset, at the beginning, that mine is a commentary rather than a presentation. I mean, as you go by the title, I mean, a trajectory of the field ensures sufficient literature and theoretical strands to justify the direction and emerging trends to capture the trajectory. It is still in a very nascent stage. However, I mean, there is a pressing concern to delve into a field that is in an what you call a nascent stage called media labor. I mean, the past 4 months have witnessed a mass exodus of migrant workers due to COVID-19. While most of the media attention has been rightly focused on the painful journeys undertaken by daily wage earners who were employed in construction, small industries, and the urban informal economy, another important slice of the urban workforce has received less attention. I mean, that is the low-end service workers in the media sector. As we know that informality and precarity have long characterized labor across most sectors of Indian economy. I mean, workers too in media sector are extremely vulnerable. I mean, it is a paradox that there is always an inverse relationship between wage and labor in the media sector. In other words, I mean, I would say that those who work more get less wages, be it in print, broadcasting, film, and television industries. Imagine a bellboy who does the entire work in film industry, or the hawker who reaches to unknown places in spite of hurdles to deliver the newspaper at the doorstep, are considered as unskilled or blue collar workers. I mean, an actor who comes at the last moment for a shoot gets a higher wages. I mean, even the recent reports by FICCI and other agencies are quite disturbing about the shift in technology and platforms and so on. I mean, these agencies, of course, have a very specific purpose, that is to forecast future business, media business. I mean, hence the onus is on the laborer to skill and de-skill themselves, along with changing times to cope up in the labor market of media. My comments and observations are based on the research activities at the center over the last 1 decade in the area of production, reception, and consumption in media. Besides publications on media economy, cultural history of media institutions, economic history of media, and finally, institutional history of media institutions have been brought out by my colleagues in the center. I mean, the student projects are also a good support in terms of undertaking media consumption for the last 1 decade, who have immensely contributed to the growth of knowledge in understanding labor and consumption in media sector. Some of the projects I would like to mention here, some of the projects on media convergence and convergence of labor are quite significant, and the study of labor resistance at the site of production. Let me qualify these two terms. One, I said about media convergence, because we see that we are in an era where we see that there is a convergence of media technologies. Now the question arises, does convergence in media lead to convergence in labor? So that is the question I would like to pose it, so that we can have further discussions, because we see that the people, those who work in the print and those who work in the broadcast or even in the IT sector, they would never like to come together. This is where we find that even a crisis within the labor itself, that they cannot be united as a force, or what we call in a traditional sense when we say about labor within the media sector. Now coming to the second point, what I was talking about, resistance, I said that site of resistance at the site of production. I mean, if the labor constitute and unite together, they can also create a resistance. For instance, you see the feed of any particular program which is being shot in a particular place, taken to Bombay. From Bombay, it has been finally processed and sent to Hong Kong. Then it is beamed across the world so that you get a direct live telecast. Now imagine this message, I mean, the speed in which it travels. By the same time, suppose there is a case of gender, there is a case of communal violence, or there is a case of any other things. Can the media worker create a site of resistance at the site of production itself, of the program itself? So that is my idea, that suppose I, as a feminist scholar, would say that, look, why certain images about women are being shown in a particular way in television? Being a women, a media worker, can I create a protest? Can I sort of try to object such kind of production of images, the way this has been shot, processed, and even beamed across the world? So that is what Vincent Mosco is a very leading political economist of media, tries to give a interesting example where he talks about 3 interesting cases he takes as a case in point. One is about the Boeing industry in France, where the entire Boeing crews went on a strike, so completely the French economy collapsed. Now, second example is about Australia, where you find all the long distance calls were switched off, so people made free calls across the world. So this is where the power of the labor, power of the worker coming together, creating a site of resistance at the site of production that can affect the economy, that can affect the state as well. So this is what broadly you find that this is a labor resistance even in the media sector. In fact, recently, a lot of scholarship, a lot of work which is coming up. You find what you call in the IT sector, for instance, they're not allowing for unionization in the BPO and KPO sectors. So where there are collectives, young collectives, those who are trying to work and trying to make an inroad into the BPOs, where sort of trying to create a space of resistance within the BPO itself. So there are different ways that how we understand when we talk about labor, resistance, workforce, and so on. Anyway, due to time constraint, I would rather like to focus, rather than expanding the base, I would like to focus more on probably journalism sector, a little bit about broadcasting. Maybe over discussions we can touch upon other areas as well. My starting point is that an institutional perspective of media has safeguarded journalism in their media democracy nexus, but obliterated the rank and files involved in the media production. So what I'm saying is that there is so much obsession within the journalism field itself, that where we are more talking about in how press as an institution, journalism as an institution, between media and democracy, but we have completely missed out the people, those who have contributed in making this journalism possible. I mean, well, the press historians have concentrated primarily on the structure of institutions and its major forces, such as importance of protecting content instead of addressing the issue of production in terms of labor and news workers. I mean, it has resulted in a top-down history of the press that privileged property and ownership at the expense of an understanding of media work. I mean, the rise of the modern press in India coincided with colonial industrialization policy and the emergence of the working class, which was strengthened by the flow of migration and the intensity of urbanization. Yet, job security and the protection of workers against sickness or unemployment, for instance, remain an ideal, albeit a lofty one, throughout the colonial period. Newspapers embraced the push for industrialization as a path towards economic progress and expressed the sentiments of the business community in the post-independent period. Once revenue and taxation was imposed, like any other commodity, newspapers also witnessed the new structural patterns of industrialization in mergers and consolidations that resulted in part from dwindling circulation figures and the collapse of many newspapers that were in circulation in colonial period. In fact, I just would like to reiterate here that as we know that most of the students, those who study the history of newspapers, we all are proud of saying that during colonial India, during the freedom struggle, there were so many newspapers. In fact, all the so-called freedom fighters, they were having bilingual newspapers, one in English, one in other vernacular language. And what happened? What happened post 47? Where are those newspapers? Probably that remains as an enigma, and hardly we talk about. We just say that they all died, they petered out, and suddenly you find the business takeover came by all these so-called industrialists, like you have Birlas, you have there's so many Dalmias, and so many others, Bennett Coleman, Times of India, and Sau Jain, and so many others. So this is what one of the major shift was. Most of these newspapers were registered under a No Profit, No Loss Act in prior to freedom struggle, prior to independence. But after independence, as I said, they followed a pattern of industrialization and a business, and that is how they run. So I said that once revenue and taxation was imposed like any other commodity, so newspaper hence it becomes a commodity. A newspaper also witnessed a new structural patterns of industrialization in mergers, consolidations that resulted in part from dwindling circulation figures and so on. The ownership displayed a very conservative attitude, particularly towards the unionization of individualistic and poorly paid news workers, and attempts under the terms of what you call the term child labor laws to stop the hiring of underage news boys. I mean, press as a place of employment, an environment of work, and a site of struggle over conditions of labor and ideas of freedom are of less attention. I mean, least attention, you can say. I mean, a history of media workers not only explains the nature and extent of industrial growth in the newspaper industry, but also defines progress in terms of human capital. That is, the investment of labor, knowledge, and experience in the service of media ownership. Any understanding of news work entails activities that ranges from typographical workers and printers and their unions to clerical workers and others involved in the production of newspapers. I mean, the concept of news workers are generally referred to individual and collective actors in the editorial process whose work is based on professional practices that are largely defined and enforced by press ownership. Media work focuses on the construction of realities and helps maintain the institutional part of the media. It involves the labor of journalists, among others, who are hired to perform to the expectations of their bosses and in the name of freedom of the press. The subsequent confrontation between the lofty ideals and the need to make a living becomes an existential question, and the results reflect the pressure of industrial demands and the ability of individual journalists to compromise. I mean, their professional accomplishments are shaped by permanent struggle involving societal inequities, institutional barriers, and personal commitments. Besides, the process of work is typically anonymous and disappears in the product itself. It is also important to remember that the first journalism historians, if at all the authors of various memoirs, had their roots in the profession. They were trained in neither history nor the social sciences. Rather, they had often left careers in journalism without ever telling their own stories, and therefore without contributing to the professional biography of news workers. Although, I mean, news workers' voices were not heard in the sweeping accounts of the advancement of the media throughout the past century, it is possible that a collective history of news workers existed in the biographical and autobiographical writings of former journalists. Broadcasting sector is not innocent enough. I mean, the colonial government proposed a policy of radio catering to urban, rural, and labor exclusively by early 50s, right before independence. I mean, before independence, already the British government had already introduced one policy document, where it's sort of tried to make a separate categories of radio. One is a urban radio, one is a rural radio, one is what you call a labor radio. It shows that there was a good chunk of migrant populations and who were engaged in labor activities. So they also needed information, hence a need for a labor radio that came up as a proposal prior to 47, but for understandable reasons in the post-independent states, it did not work out. But why such categories were made? Why such categories were made? One of the reasons is that if you go back to the history of broadcasting in India, you find that the idea of a radio actually came as a called, it was actually given by it's called the Anglophiles in London. And one of the Lady Irwin was the patron of Indian Village Welfare Association, which was established in London. And they sort of tried to, and most of the, who were the members of this particular associations, mostly the Anglophiles, retired wounded soldiers, doctors, and army senior personnel, and most of the people, those who served their time and tenure in India and went back to London, and they became a part of this particular Indian Village Welfare Associations. And they donated a ham radio. That is the first one coming to India before even your All India Radio or even radio instituted by BBC came up in India. This is actually the ham radio, which was actually installed in Peshawar. Peshawar, interestingly, for your information, Peshawar during 1930s was under Gurgaon district. So it was one of the commissioner of Gurgaon. It's called Frank Lugat Brain, who was the commissioner, who had interesting engagements with Gandhi, and he was actually promoting this whole ham radio and trying to reach out. But what was the content of the message? It was all about how to protect the rural countryside, how to give them ideas about sanitation, about animal husbandry, and so on. So this is what is, you had a Indian Village Welfare Association, and the radio came up during that time. But so what I'm trying to say is that at the same time, they're also equally conscious of saying that we need to protect these rural from the urban counterparts. We need to protect this rural from the urban counterparts, because the urbans are clever, they are unscrupulous, and they can cheat anytime to the rural. That is a colonial hangover and colonial mindset, to make a distinction between rural and urban divide. And besides that, labor was another question. So that is where they were sort of trying to propose for a three-pronged strategies, prior to independence, talking about how to introduce 3 sets of radios in India. But that never saw its day. Labor radio could not come up. Now, probably this was, not the sense of urgency for the government of the day in the post-independent period. It had, in fact, its own designs. You find that 50s is a time where there was a massive marginalization of workers or labor in All India Radio itself. In fact, you find that the very introduction of language itself, Hindi itself, tried to marginalize a large section of radio people, workers, those who were in the radio broadcasting sector in India. You find that marginalize a large section of workers. In fact, it was Keskar's policy, the first information broadcasting minister, who in fact started what you call, and there are critiques of saying that it's a way of Hinduizing radio. In fact, there are interesting debates between Patel and Keskar. Patel was completely against Keskar's strategy of introducing Hindi. He said that, look, not every region in India is speaking Hindi or Urdu. Even he said that, look, you can't. But in fact, Jugal writes in his memoir this particular conversation between Patel and Keskar. Secondly, the music troops, those who were part of All India Radio, they were also thrown overnight, because they were considered that they're gharanas and from Lal Killa, so they're not worth. We need to build this whole. So the whole shift in the gharanas and particular communities, which were also being aimed at. That's what I'm saying. In fact, much before that, you find that after Lionel Felden left India, Bukhari was actually in charge of All India Radio, and who subsequently, after partition, he became the Director General of Pakistan Radio. Bukhari was in charge of All India Radio, and Bukhari had a continuous struggle to ascertain his identity as well as his loyalty to the Britain on the one side, on the other side to the Indians, because he had to also show that he is a part of India, so that he also, there are interesting debates. Probably somebody someday will take up this issue in the in the various debates you find in the Constitution Assembly debates. You find there is a tremendous series of questions regarding communalizing the labor force in All India Radio. That bears testimony to it. The kind of debates, confrontations we already had during 1950s early 50s, so which we can see it. So hence, when we talk about labor, labor means belonging to a caste, an ethnic group, and finally to a gender. Uh, the recent writings on history of press and printing shows the vibrancy of what we call the literary and culture scape in Indian society. In a way, it also reflects the scholarly, literary, and entrepreneurial talent in the early years of press in India. It was as much an entrepreneurial as intellectual. The idea of print and press generated a new profession and introduced a distinctive figure in the colonial public sphere. Authors of fiction and men of letters in general served the same printers. In fact, it was sometimes difficult to distinguish between the kind of contributions that were printed in newspapers and those printed in other publications, like such as books and journals, etc. In the last decades of the 19th century, however, publishing in general was in transition from loose and informal arrangements to a more formalized work organization. I mean, an emerging new journalism focused on a variety of news for a heterogeneous audience and more regular work routines for newspapermen, news workers, journalists, or whatever was the favorite term for an aspiring profession. And this was a new breed of writers for the 20th century, quite different from the gentlemen, publicists, and literate of most of the 19th century. Media work focuses on the construction of realities and helps maintain the institutional power of the media. It involves the labor of journalists, among others, who are hired to perform to the expectations of their bosses and in the name of freedom of the press. The subsequent confrontation between lofty ideals and the need to make a living becomes an existential question, and the result reflects the pressures of industrial demands and the ability of individual journalists to compromise. In fact, Andrew Otis, a young scholar who wrote a book called India's First Newspaper, it's on Hickey's. He provides a very pithy description of an untold story about India's first newspaper in Bengal. What I'm trying to say is that the historical narrative focused on the editorial role of journalism and constructed the press as a moral leader in society, disregarding a different, less uplifting or restorative function of reporting. The desire to identify with the glorious potential of a working relationship between media and the idea of democracy is reflected in the subsequent representations of media and their development in India. In fact, the actual process of news work, however, remained a peripheral concern, particularly as its practices are often uncontrolled, dubious, at variance with notions of ethical conduct and not necessarily utilized in service of the image of communal or national leadership. In fact, the strained relationship between the press and organized labor is a congenital condition that emerged in the anti-labor attitudes of media ownership and is reinforced by a general lack of labor and union reporting, except in the sensational context of strikes. This antagonism is neither new nor surprising. As reported in the first press commission, the All India Newspaper Editors Conference was interested only in the editorial aspect of the newspaper. On the contrary, the other two associations were concerned with the business aspects of the industry. Surprisingly, newspapers were the members of these associations, but not individual members. There were occasions where both the associations took joint action regarding fixing of minimum wages for journalists. However, these recommendations were not mandatory. News reporting provided the desire for an immediate result, that the era's mechanical capabilities and commercial opportunities helped to both foster and satisfy. The early 20th century was also a period in which journalistic characteristics of individualism, the quick fix, and the maverick attitudes led to the image of what you call the boisterous reporters enjoying a very hedonistic lifestyle. I mean, mechanization of labor produced a division of labor in which reporters' work was often the least valued economically, even though it produced commercial credibility as part of newspapers' selling point. Increased speed in newspaper production produced both a division of labor and specialization of labor in newspapers. Reporters were but one widget in the entire mechanized process, and in spite of the stereotypes of spirited individualism and work freedom and their work life, as labor became more specialized, the reporter's work and the training for this work also emerged as specialized needs and activities. The issue of professionalism among reporters became more complex, and as the control and value of journalistic work became increasingly economically determined. There is an obvious difference between a business and a profession. There is an implied intellectual creativity and superiority in this distinction between business and profession, the notion of which often framed the debate of concerning professional status on newspaper reporters. It also raises one of the argument's paradoxes. If indeed journalism education was to professionalize newspaper work by making its workers more efficient and the work more standardized, then where was the time and space left for individualistic, creative endeavors by reporters? Professionalism allowed reporters to hamper improvements in their own work lives much more effectively than could publisher threats or policies. The trade union plan of organization is looked upon with some disfavor by most of them, and perhaps with some justice, since it suggests that journalism is a trade rather than a profession. On the other hand, there is nothing in the trade union idea that should essentially bar professional workers. What did not change during this time was that the work lives of newspaper reporters were still ones in which a living salary, reasonable work hours, and the conditions, job security, and control over one's work remained elusive work factors. Reporters continued to be replaceable cog in the machinery of the modern newspapers. I mean, while analyzing the sociological studies, we see in the past research has shed light much on the notion of labor and industry and the relations in Indian society with regard to commitment, migration, rural-urban dichotomy, attitudinal and behavioral dimensions of work, class formation, unionization, factory as a system like organization, newspaper system, and so on. In several other studies, scholars also kept an eye towards a cooperative, labor-managed production for national development and the underlying modernization process, whereby laborers have to adjust to the growing demands of nation state. I mean, it also led to focus on collective bargaining, inter-union rivalries over jurisdictions, and intra-union battles over organizational structures, funds, and power, rather than any emphasis on workplace relationships or the links between laborers and their social political communities. I mean, on the contrary, media research remained conspicuous silent from these developments. I mean, conventional media histories continue to reproduce compilations of facts, sometimes assisted by a trend toward quantitative history, but always relying on traditional ideological constructs of media history. I mean, the field not only remained isolated from new developments in social history, but was further confined to the margins of professional journalism programs when social or cultural historians began to discover the importance of media and communication for their own work. The lack of a labor perspective of media history is also related to a more general neglect of media and communication histories of marginal groups whose experiences never acquired social or political weight and whose significance in terms of serving the need for institutional biographies of power could therefore be considered minimal at best. In general, considerations, for instance, we talk about considerations of a Dalit media. It also followed the traditional methods of producing series of institutional biographies. They became social or caste phenomena in a prominently upper caste Brahminic media culture, suggesting that media history is a product of the cultural consciousness of its time. I mean, considerations of Dalit media have also been driven by economic determinants, which help reinforce prevailing notions of media as a viable economic enterprises rather than as a cultural institution. Yet, the historical bias of cultural studies toward the conditions of society promises a new opportunities for understanding the issues of class, caste, and gender within media history. In fact, here we were talking about now a lot of discussions going on about that. What is the caste representations in the newsroom? I mean, this is nothing new. This is nothing new. In fact, if you recall the debates or refer the debates in feminism, you find after Betty Friedan's feminine mystique, that is how the portrayal of the second you find second wave, where it has been talked about what we call Gay Tuckman, who talks about how there is a symbolic annihilation and trivialization of women. And that context says that probably the more women participate in the press, there will be a better image of the women. But that is not necessarily true, or that may not be true, because after all, who controls press? Who controls press? So that is also equally important. That is the ownership we are referring to. I mean, a cultural media history requires a different look at the contemporary conditions of journalism and demands a new sensitivity to expressions of cultural identity while it examines various media and their social uses. The writing of a cultural media history as a critical history, however, also exposes and reassesses the ruling assumptions of liberal pluralism and analyzes the relationship between state, journalism, and society. I mean, such a research agenda is not only ambitious, but difficult to operationalize in an increasingly conformist educational and academic environment because it questions theoretical assumptions about freedom and democracy and emphasizes the process of work and the place of labor. I mean, for instance, the proximity of journalism education to media industries coupled of late with a new sensitivity toward the demands of commerce and industry to implement practical courses and address professional concerns in university curricula. I mean, it may have created a real or imagined political climate that affects the practical commitment to any sustained and substantive discourse on labor and media ownership. There has been no major theoretical break and therefore no new historical narrative concerning the development of Indian media, while the dominant paradigm of media history continues to reproduce itself in biography and periodization and reinforces the currency of standard media histories. Its practitioners operate within a relatively insulated institutional framework and noted that the resulting work rarely meets or engages cultural studies in historical analysis. In fact, the traditional approach to media history is now becoming marginalized by a series of theoretical developments, including the work of culturalists. Media history has been rediscovered through these Marxist and non-Marxist traditions of cultural studies and reproduced in attempts to define and understand larger social and political issues in contemporary society. I mean, although the modern concerns regarding the contribution of marginalized groups to the development of journalism of gender or caste, ethnicity, and class, and its role in society have found a voice, much needs to be done to reconstruct the history of communication in these communities. I mean, the blind spot of Indian media history remains its inability to react ideologically and politically against a persisting and overwhelming feeling of homogeneity, wholeness, and a sense of singular purpose that permeates the general histories of Indian journalism. These efforts have successfully masked the historical conditions of diversity and reinforced problems of social and ethnic segregations by ignoring the potential strength of a journalism of multicultural interests. The political nature of labor history could lead to a giving the plight of minorities, including media workers, expression, and beyond that could encourage critical support. The differences between political advocacy and cultural history become insignificant when both express a common concern for recognizing the importance of people and groups as participants in the creation of history. Moreover, cultural history of media workers provides the foundation for strategies of interventions in current media practices. Finally, a history of media work is crucial to an understanding of the nature of professional practices, their changes, and therefore their possibilities among alternative forms of communication and journalism in society. I would just like to stop it here. Thank you. You can see
Thank you
that
very much,
probably.
sir, for your excellent presentation on an area which is not talked about. We are journalists, but we never get an opportunity to talk about ourselves, who we are, what are our plights, what are our job conditions, what are our control over the output we create, what are the creators' control over creations and all these, and the media history, the way the Marxist and non-Marxist way of looking at it. It's a wonderfully explained area of a new area which was never thought of and never got a space in any kind of discussion. So first, let me congratulate and thank you for creating this agenda, setting this agenda of having discussion on uh, this. I think, sir, by mistake, sir has gone away, but I would request that sir should get in. I think sir has switched on something. I think sir is coming back. So I'll just wait. Yes, sir is back.
Sorry, I pressed the
So just go to that. Yeah, I know, sir, the wrong button. Yeah, yeah. The
wrong.
technology is something. Your next agenda of your research is a new technology, not the
Yeah,
labor. Now
absolutely.
the labor
I hope
intensive from
so.
the technology. Your research on the impact of technology on the content, when the technique or content, whichever is more important. So this, I could say that could be your next area of research. But let us come back to. Thank you very much that you could revive and come back. Yes, let us come back to your point. So, is the media history has never enlightened this area which you have touched upon. You have set an agenda. I think we will start locating it. Sir, there is no point of repeating what exactly you have said, but one or two points which I would like to, as a media professional, I would like to reiterate and I would like you to kindly deliberate a little bit. One is that we understand that convergence of media, it had to converge. Media convergence is an in thing. Like no newspaper will allow its readers to be left from the purview of the newspaper throughout the day. That means in the morning he is getting news alerts from one organization. Throughout the day he is listening to another inputs from various other organizations. In the evening he is watching something from television, and then in the next morning he's going back again to the newspaper. No, newspaper will not let you remain discarded from that particular newspaper, because the question of brand connectivity is very, very important. Brand loyalty is very important. So it is a convergence. It is the same newspaper organization who gives you news alerts, who has a webs, so gives you newsletters thrice or 4 times a day. Then there is a web portal where you can go in and find out what is the latest, and then the archive and the history and the background, which they cannot print in the newspaper in 8 pages or 12 pages or 16 pages, or even if 24 or 56 pages. So, but they are giving an opportunity. See, your source remains the same. So that's the convergent, and they give is the newspapers are have started giving small video clips. So one story, you have a small brief, you have a longer article, and you also have some videos inscribed in it. So you go to the portal, it's an operative kind of a thing. So these are the new things which are coming. So the convergence has made it labor also convergent, as you have rightly said. We call it multitasking. Now the mobile journalism or anything like, I'm not accompanied by any camera person. I shoot in the mobile and I edit either in the mobile, or I go back and I'm not accompanied by any video editor. So I edit myself and I dump it in the server. So I'm a reporter, I'm a camera person, I'm a video editor. So multitasking. So there is a change of nomenclature or quantity of labor and the skill of labor. Multitasking is multi-skilling, and obviously the reduction of number. Would you like to say some,
I
throw some light on this, sir?
I think we need to clarify there is a difference between multitasking, multi-skilling, and convergence. In fact,
Sir.
convergence is actually a kind of a form where all technologies, like for instance, when I talk about my mobile, there is a convergence of all technologies in mobile itself. Like we say that today, I don't need to go to a film hall. I mean, that's collapsed. So the technologies are converging. But my question was, if there is technologies are converging, can the labor in different sector, you raise another interesting dimension where you talked about the multitasking, but I'm talking about you worked in the broadcasting sector.
Sir, you continue, sir. Please, you
I
continue,
mean,
sir.
you work in the broadcasting sector. Can you say that the newspaper journalist would ever come together with the television journalist? If you recall, initially when television started its news, there was an extremely critical aptitude towards the television journalists. In fact, I don't want to say here, because newspaper journalists had maintained certain ethics, certain ethical standards. I think that collapsed completely along with the TV news because of your pressure of breaking news and all kinds of news. So you literally jump the walls of the building, enter the house, try to push the microphone, and try to collect all kinds of news. So I'm saying there are certain ethics, there are certain kinds of, so in that sense, but will they come together? Will they come together? Will they come together? So the issue is, similarly, somebody is working in an IT sector. Somebody is working in an IT sector, and a laborer working in a BPO IT sector and a newspaper, you find a hawker. So you find the workers, they cannot converge. In when I'm talking about convergence of labor, you're trying to constitute a class as we understand by labor, because we say that labor class. When I say labor class, you find that there are hierarchies within the class. I mean, sector itself. This is one industry. Within the industry, you will also see that there are so much asymmetries. Now, for instance, today, when we say that a new term which has been nowadays used, it's called, because you know that because the asymmetry exists within television production or even a newspaper, a journalist. Now, I would like to use another term. It's called creative labor, because now you find that all the developed countries have come out with their policies. India has yet to start. It never took off, even though during 1984-85 there was an attempt to start or to initiate a dialogue about creative industry and creative policy, and it could never see its day. But if you go across the world to any part of the globe, like US, England, France, Singapore, Australia, China, even they have all creative policies, creative industries. So they call it
Sure.
creative
Yes.
industries. A journalist, we
Right.
call it a creative, he's a creative labor. So
Right.
you obviously do not identify yourself with a hawker. So you would say that, no, I'm different from a hawker. So why do you put me? So that's what I said, white collar worker, blue collar worker. So now the issue is coming up creative. Now, again, mapping is going on across the world that, you look at so many sectors of media, starting from music, broadcasting, television, all kinds of heritage, tourism. You find that what constitutes creativity? Who are the people actually engaged in that creative dimension? Not all of them. So you find now a lot of debates going on. So I'm saying that, look, it is so we have missed the bus of what you call convergence of labor and convergence. And secondly, I have little discomfort with the term convergence, simply because I mean, convergence has been much more celebrated by literature of journalism. I do not think an economist would be very keen to use the term convergence. I mean, why an economist would say that, look, you mean to say that film has collapsed, film economy has collapsed, and radio has collapsed? They've all come together as a one single sector. They don't have a business. So for an economist, it is completely an irrational logic to talk about convergence. But however, in media journalism, we celebrate very fast without understanding the concept, deep understanding about the concepts, and we popularize, like we talk about today, convergence journalism, right? which is a fashionable lead. But I'm
Thank
a
you,
little
sir.
skeptical about such terms.
Thank you, sir. Since this new idea is that it's clarified, and we would like to have your views on this, and to our other attendees, as I have initiated and
Uh-huh.
question answer. Most welcome. We have received questions by go 1.5 hours, so there will be opportunity to answer as many questions as possible. This I'll take just a couple of minutes in raising a couple of other points which sir has already raised. Like sir has said that how much the resistance does labor has in media. So these days mostly things are outsourced, getting the service, the same service which used to be had from the insiders, full timers, workers. Now they are getting outsourced. So obviously there is a little chance of showing a resistance. And you have nicely referred to another point, sir, that suppose uh, I personally is creating something as a mandate of my hierarchical boss, and I personally don't subscribe to the idea, the portrayal of women in media, put the stigmatization or etc., not only to women, not only to other issues which I do not subscribe, but I'm compelled to contribute to that. So these are two very interesting issues with reference to the obstruction, or what you have said, that the labor's unity in showing that obstruction or showing that difference. Sir, would you kindly speak
You
on that?
see, I think media sector never, as I said, pointed out, probably media sector is the only sector which never allowed for unions. which never allowed for any unionization. You find in other sector there is a strong
Technically,
unionization.
unions are there, but still,
No, those unions have no teeth at all. You find because it is a still a kind of a cottage industry which is run by an individual, and then it completely can smash, can do anything. Hardly you see when there is no union, there is no collective voice and bargain. So the question arises that look in that context now, along with now the worst thing is the post globalization, a neoliberal economy where you are talking about more and more different kinds of arrangements with the labor, or even not only in general, and also within the media sector, what you are rightly pointing out about contractual labor and all kinds of labor outsourcing and so on. Everything is outsourced. Even the public sector is also outsourced. Forget about the media sector. I'm saying that we take all outsourced so that, I don't have to ensure that he will get a job or she will get a job. So you outsource it. So this is how the whole economy is running. The question is, because globalization has its own demand, I would call it the post-welfarist economy. The post-welfarist economy in a neoliberal setup is the question is that you do not make anybody permanent. It's like a BPO sector. Like BPO sector, you hire and fire. The question is just give a 15 days or 20 days notice and you can throw it out. In fact, it reminds me in the media sector. I remember a colleague of mine who applied for a job. I never knew about it. Who applied for a job, and he worked in. Was a leading scholar who wrote 2 3 books on your Star Anando, and so many others. He has written books. You can now you can know him now. He's also teaching now media abroad. He applied for a position, and the office, in like any other university sector, they asked him about his documents, and he said that they said that you give us your employment letter that you work for 10 years in this and this organization. He said, you see me everywhere in the television. You see all the YouTube, you will see me there. He said, we are not interested in this. You give me the letter. And he never had a letter. He never had a letter. He worked for 10 years, 15 years, but he never had a letter. So this is what I'm saying, how this duplicities and the way this media organizations are working. I think it's already pointed out. I forgot to tell you that most of these newspapers, they run what you call fictitious names, so that tax evasions and this is where so many other names are there involved. So there are a lot of see that one doesn't understand. There is no transparency. I think that is the reason why my center wanted to do not only governing media, which is also equally important, also extending governance to the other spheres of social life, because it is equally important. It is equally important because you see, it reminds me in one of the information broadcasting ministry when I was a member. It reminds me that Pranab Mukherjee, when he was finance minister, and most of these newspapers, they requested him to bail out from the debt, and Pranab Mukherjee told them that you submit your audit, and then I will help you out. And it was shocking that except one newspaper, no other newspaper, so-called metro newspapers, could submit their audit reports. So this shows the kind of violations and the infringement in all handling of finances that goes on in the industry. So one never writes about it, one never does research on it, and one never sees the finance mode of it. So the question is, the journalist becomes a moral custodian about writing about morality, ethics, and civics. See, it has no meaning. First of all, you need to also understand the place where the workplace and the environment where you work. It is very important. I mean, without understanding that, we start
I
talking about
I
in a
think,
very
sir, you have
macro
raised
terms.
a very, very pertinent question. When we put fingers on one finger, there are three pointed to us. We must set our home right first, and then we say that this is not being organized properly and things like that. I had other questions, especially the heterogeneity of labor in the media, sir, as far as the wages is concerned. Someone is not getting even 10,000 today, and someone is getting a couple of lakhs of rupees in Indian media. I understand their skills and their celebrity factors and other things are there, but that's an issue we will talk a little later. I would like to give the opportunity to the people who have just asked some questions. Let me, I'll just read out the questions. So, with your
Okay.
kind permission, said by Dr. Ritu Sharma. She says the cultural trajectory of the labor in media is intertwined in economy and behavioral aspects of the society. Will this be then convergence or divergence from the real issues of socio-economic crisis and intersectionality?
I mean, it's a total divergence. It's a total divergence. I mean, there is no linkage at all. So I think it's a time that we need to do serious research on. I mean, I don't have answer. I mean, as I said, I don't have answer for all the questions. So that's why I said that it is a commentary, my observations. I don't have any answer for most of the things simply because much has to be done. I mean, idea was that the young scholars should take up rather than get kowtowed with what is happening, trying to chase the latest events because we have completely missed because we have not seriously done research. That's why we are lagging behind industry. That is not the case in the West. That is not the case in the West. In the West, a journalist takes up a grant endowment, comes to the university department, and does a research and goes back to the industry. But here, I mean, see, this is where you need to see. You spend 10 years in your industry, and you, on the basis of your practice, you'd like to reflect and write something. You come back to the university, bring the money, and do the research, and you write a book, publish something, then you go back. So that is called industry academia nexus. It is not the other way, the way we talk about, like every day I have to put a tick mark whether we have a industry academia nexus. All rubbish. Nothing is happening. Nothing is happening.
But sir,
Some
you
industry
know that the endowments are not much available. I don't want to say that they are not available. Such sabbaticals are now coming up. People are taking, and sir, the rate of attrition is a bit higher now in media, and the burnout is very high. So after 10 years, 20 years, many people would like to go and do some research rather than reporting or making up pages or editing
absolutely,
things on a
absolutely,
daily basis.
absolutely,
That's
yes.
true. I mean, the knowledge which a journalist gets by virtue of being going to various places, the first-hand information, the ground realities, it could be linked forward or backward with the theories and academia. But the endowment, whether the university gives this opportunity or vice versa, the journalist gets an endowment from somewhere. It's not zero, but it's not very common as we see in the West. So I come to the second question. The second question is by Pratim Bhattacharya, and his question is, how might we explain what's wrong about the exploitation in media under capitalism to someone who wasn't convinced? Should I repeat the question?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
How might we explain what's wrong about the exploitation in media under capitalism to someone who wasn't convinced?
You see, you need to understand, you need to qualify when you say what is capitalism in the media context. That you know that there are logics of capitalism. The press or the media industry is run in the logic of capitalism. So, because of the logic of capitalism, then you need to understand that who's exploited and how is exploited, what is the nature of relationship, and what is the source of income, and what is the revenue pattern. You need to do a larger study to justify. Exploitation is basically in terms of the work and in terms of the work profile, in terms of your relations. I mean, you need to do a larger political economy study in terms of understanding when you talk about exploitations. So
Thank you,
you
sir.
need.
Next question, because there are a couple of questions which are coming. We should give the opportunities to the people who have asked the questions. Dr. Pranto Pratik Patanayak, and his question is, will this narrative of labor in media industry will this narrative of labor in media industry gets subverted when we talk about alternative media that has come into being, like Dalit Dastak video volunteers? Thank you so much for this interesting and informative talk. Yes, I was also asking, when you said Dalit media, it is an alternative form of media. It's not traditional media, it's not mainstream media, but an alternative media. So, in terms of your media labor discourse, where do they stand, the alternative media? So,
I think when you say Dalit media, probably you misconstrued the idea that I also mentioned in my lecture about Dalit media. Uh, Dalit media, the initial debates when it occurred on Dalit, well, I remember when Dalits were sort of trying to discuss about media, they were basically trying to remain away from the mainstream media. But at the same time, they were also equally looking for finance. But what you are talking about is a video format. So, like nowadays, everybody is putting all the videos and putting. Now, what you are trying to drag me to the notion of subaltern aspect, subaltern media. What I'm trying to say, of course, you need to labor. When I'm saying labor, now, as I mentioned about the whole cultural history, we need to do more studies so that we understand a gender, a caste, a Dalit perspective of media that will all come together, that will enrich the whole idea of labor. Labor is not
thank you.
exclusive about, Dalit, it has to keep Dalit away. So, but
The
it is a part of.
intricacies after the umbrella concept of labor has to
Yeah,
be
yeah,
studied well.
absolutely. Yeah,
Studied well.
absolutely.
Sir, I come to Dr. Shourav Gupta, who is an assistant professor of Central University of Odisha in Koraput, and he's very well read and very skillful also in performing arts and in literature also. So his question is, will the on
Sorry.
cultural history objective? Sorry, repeat. Will the research on cultural history of the media objective, as media organizations may not be honest their institutional journey, and with the existence of a parallel narrative which gets revealed later?
I didn't get it.
I'll read
There is
out
a
the question.
voice. There is a
Yeah.
voice. Can you put? Can it be on the screen? I can see it.
I'll try to do that,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
can you
yeah, yeah. No, no,
hear
no,
me
no.
correctly? Yeah. Will the research on cultural history of media organizations be objective, as media organizations may not be honest about their institutional journey, and with the existence of a parallel narrative which gets revealed later?
Well, I mean, the question is it also depends. It also depends. I mean, people would have not done cultural history of media. In fact, I mean, if you talk about whole Raymond Williams' work and talking about cultural history, and even look at the eminent scholars, I did not mention about it here, like bringing this whole E.P. Thompson's, then subsequently Eric Hobsbawm, or even you talk about the other scholar, E.P. Thompson, Eric Hobsbawm, you find that there is a whole culturalist narrative which has come up in a very big way and doing research. The question is how, to what extent organizations are transparent. I mean, I agree with you. How organizations are transparent. Indeed, I agree because I mean, simply seeing the website, or even checking their data through the SEBI files, is not enough because the transactions of business, the whole things happening today, like television, you know that there are 600 television channels, and out of that, almost 599 channels are literally sick units. But in spite of that, they're running. In spite of that, they're running. So, what are the transactions? Where from the black money is coming? It's very difficult because there's a larger game plan which is involved in it. It's very difficult to decipher. But however, one should not give up. As a researcher, I think one should not give up. And if you can dig one nail there, probably that will be the history. That will be the history. So
So
I'm saying that one
I
should.
come to Mr. Bidu Dash. Media grew as industry when passion was translated into profession. Historically, labor is free in media sector in India. Hasn't the scope for paid labor increased for the middle class youth?
Sorry, I didn't get you.
He said media grew as industry when passion was translated into profession. Historically, labor is free in media sector in India. Hasn't the scope for paid labor increased for the middle class youth?
It has. It has indeed. It has. It has contributed immensely because for the first time, the idea of an institutionalization, a professionalization, which took place, so that look at it has given rise to a contribution in terms of the middle class youth. I mean, it is the middle class today. You see, there are. Well, look at Delhi, for instance. There is a substantive workforce in the media sector today. You find whether you go to Badursa Jafar Mag or you go to Noida. I mean, these are the media hubs, and you see quite a chunk of middle class population involved, youth especially, are doing jobs. I mean, I remember, I know that Jamia students are doing very well in terms of catering to all these, hubs, and they're all getting jobs. No matter how much you are paid, that's a different issue because the entire thing has come down because initially in 1990s you find that the amount of any fresh graduate postgraduate, the salary which a fresh postgraduate was getting was unthinkable, unthinkable. But today you find that the industry has gone in such a big way, they don't want to hire a certified, dignified from any dignified institution. They want somebody who can do, as you rightly pointed out, multitasking. You can also bring the glass and bottle water as well as clean the table, then also take the camera and do the work. That is a multitasking work. So I'm saying that look, that is the level today the industry has come down. So you find that basically they want you, but people are happy with this and they are doing the work.
Sir, I come to the question of Orko Prabhu Chattopadhyay. Citizens in our country possess the right to freedom of speech and expression. Institutions don't. So individuals employed in a media house are made to use their freedom of speech and expression according to their overbearing agenda. Is this a case of purchasing rights? Should there be a safeguard against this?
You see, if you recall the 2006 bill, 2006, the broadcast bill, and that bill has
Which
not
has
yet been
never seen the light of the day.
yeah, that bill has not yet materialized. And one of the reasons of this broadcast bill of 2006 is actually a confrontation between what you call press and the citizen. So the freedom of speech is actually an individual rights. But here is the freedom of press.
And so the bill came with the content code,
Yeah,
proposed content code.
yeah,
Both of
yeah,
them did not materialize.
yeah. So I'm saying that now when you say freedom of press, press is an organization, press is an institution. But however, they sort of try to maneuver, they try to push the agenda so that now you can see that you cannot pass anything today. You have no liberty to pass because you are a part of a global network. Now, because of so many global televisions and their partnership and so on, you are connected with the larger issues. So a so nothing is under the national jurisdiction. We live in a state of comfort by saying that we have a constitution, but that constitution has no meaning in the larger construct because the jurisdictions have gone, it was called in a transnational site of,
Yes.
now you
The
cannot take
open
it in a
sky has
national
made
court.
us global. Open sky has made us global. And
Yeah,
again,
yeah.
the cliche term of McLuhan is that we are in a global village. So
So
anybody
it's
in
actually
communication and
the site of jurisdiction has shifted from a national to a transnational sites.
Right, sir.
So the
Right.
context doesn't arise.
We come to the question of Lokesh Chakma. Questions and other works across the audiovisual industry belong to the unorganized sector. Given the present circumstances, where do the rights of labor stand?
They have no rights. They have no rights at all. They have no rights at all. It is unfortunate. They have no rights
Yes,
at all.
unfortunate. The sector may not be an unorganized sector. Location, the sector could be media and entertainment sector, which is a very organized sector. And so far, before COVID, the growth rate CAGR has been much higher than the growth rate. So this is the industry, which is I should not say sunshine industry, but it has almost double if we consider that our annual growth rate is around 6% or so. I mean, there are various numericals and various figures, but if we stick to this on an average plus minus, and the double-digit growth figure is attributed to M&N industry in terms of any think tank reports like Ernst & Young or an EY or the KPMG or anything. But the sector is organized, but the labor is totally unorganized sector, because you are not television entertainment sector is assignment basis. So you work and you get paid, and then you are not there with the project. It's like that. So I come to the next, Mr. Borun Roy. How effective can new media be in countering media run by big media houses and empowering alternative media run by individual journalists?
You see, this whole new media, what you talk about already, there are a lot of studies which were done in the Arab Springs, and the way Arab Spring, as you know, that Arab Spring is a total American creation. I mean, it's not something happened. It's an American creation, and it was launched in Arabs to dismantle. But a lot of interesting studies are showing. In fact, you see, even Simon Cottle has written also, and also there are a lot of inside work which is coming up. No matter whatever the social media is, you cannot outrightly live away or reject the mainstream media, that is television. So television still has a grip and control over the Arabs
Sir,
within the nation state.
Sir, one thing we have to understand: the power of social media. An individual running a website or running, if he or she is being visible and there is a following, there's like Twitter or so, there's
You
a
see,
huge following.
You see, I'll tell you. Let me the power of social media too much. It has been over explained and
Overrated, yes.
Overrated. I would like to see social media in a different context. I would like to see social media as a gift. Now, just let me explain. I would like to see social media as a gift. What is a gift? It's actually called as a part of a gift economy. Now, social media, which has been given free. Now, prior to that, you had a public service broadcasting. There was a sense of accountability, and the state was accountable to the public. So you can raise those questions. Now, social media is given a space where the state has withdrawn receipts, and it makes you to fight with each other. It makes you to fight with each other. That is caste, gender, creed. You fight with each other. State has taken a back seat. Also. So state has taken a back seat. Everybody is enjoying. So you give so many messages. You give so many. I mean, we have done a lot of studies on social media and trying to analyze all these, hits and so on, hashtags and so on. We find that it's a mockery. Absolutely, one is not taking seriously. So this is a phase. Suddenly, everybody jumping and thinking that we have reached what we call the post-broadcast model. When broadcasting has collapsed, so we have reached what we call a post-broadcast. Everything can broadcast anywhere in any part of the world.
Yeah.
So, it's not. I think we are too much overrating. We are too much overrating. You need to do more serious ground studies. I mean, these are all statements. These are
Sir,
all
we
statements.
go to the last question because we said that we have started at 6 o'clock and we'll go at around 1.5 hours because there are a lot many people who are also watching us. So, sir, poor work. It's by Ruby Nanda. So, poor work culture is an open secret in media industry. Will the work culture improve in near future with the media persons themselves being silent about this exploitation? Media culture and journalists remaining silent.
I have no idea because journalists themselves are under threat.
Yes.
Because industry does not require anymore a journalist. Let me honestly make a submission. In fact, industry doesn't require it. They need MBAs. They need management chaps. Anybody can write for them. So they want revenue. They want circulation figure to go high, no matter whatever you write. So the question is the culture, what it used to be, that has completely deteriorated. And now we need to seriously rethink about journalism and newspaper and think about it is just a commodity, nothing else. I think we are very shy. Probably we have corrupted generations of students. We are not telling them the truth, and they have been reading those old textbooks, and those textbooks have no meaning at all and irrelevant totally, and they all teach you about very very high sanguine and Victorian notions of understanding journalism, nobility, fourth estate, and so on. I think you need to literally look for all these concepts. I think we are not doing enough scholarship to upgrade our textbooks and present it in a manner that where you are connecting with the contemporaneity. That is most
Right, sir. In
important.
a globalized world, things have changed. It's no longer our freedom struggle, and all our freedom fighters had one
In
media
fact,
unit of their
in
own.
in fact, I would just like to end by saying, as one of the scholars says, journalism is another form of ism. Journalism is another form of ism, brewed in England, matured in United States, exported to different parts of the world, and that is how people we have swallowed and drinking those journalism wine. So people are still scared that why in US they have totally contested, interrogated journalism. How in third world and other parts of the world still we are sticking to the same journalistic practices. That's all.
It's true, but the plurality of media at least gives you some sort of information, at least whether to believe or not. But it is the plurality of media which survive and which acts to some extent what is the role of fourth estate. At least the information which some agencies want to, suppress are being dug out by the fourth estate still, and it is plurality. Maybe crony journalism is overpowering, but still there is hope. But, sir, being a professional journalist, I must confess that the kind of agenda you have set and the kind of preliminary, you might say a commentary, you might say an essay, but you have thought that time has come to see the journalists who have created, created the outputs in the media, in journalism, in newspapers and radio. So how did they work? Who are they?
Yeah,
Whose
absolutely.
freedom? And
Absolutely.
and I think the fascinating things as far as the job conditions are, if you
Absolutely.
study that how many are totally employed, how many are contractual, how many are assignees, how many are stringers, and what is their social security from the media organization or from the
Absolutely.
society. These are the
Absolutely.
issues. There should not be any myth, but these are the
Absolutely.
issues to be
Yeah, yeah.
studied well with a proper research basis which you are doing.
Absolutely.
So thank you
Absolutely.
very much for setting this agenda to think of a, a sector which is very important and which is overrated, but maybe having a problem from inside. And we know the disease which uh, creates problems from inside can create what we understand. But at least you have thought of studying this, and after the study there may be a cure. but the huge change is taking place. The concept of media, the concept of media industry, and the alternative media, social media. Let's see. So thank you very much for your outstanding and very thoughtful presentation on an area which is much less discussed. I think almost never discussed. We discuss about others, but never discuss about ourselves, our working condition, our social conditions, and our agendas, and the way we are destined to go on delivering. So I think in the days to come, your research will be more effective, at least mapping up the
Yes,
history
absolutely.
properly, and then
Absolutely.
the right kind of policies, and those misnomers will be disappear from the people's mind. We hope for media, we hope for a better media, we hope for better media
Absolutely.
persons, but
Absolutely.
these researches will help us to gain that. I think with these words, all good things should come to an end, and we said that we'll be around 1.5 hours. So thank you very much for agreeing to.
Thanks.
I should
Yeah.
thank the communication and Debayon, and then Professor Moushami Bhattacharya also for organizing this, because sir, in a lockdown we can also remain locked down, but since the
Absolutely.
technology has created this platform, yes, physically we are unable to have this kind of discourses, but our brains are working, and since we have an alternative platform, let us continue with discourses, and these are going to remain. This is recorded, will be present on the platform. So maybe somebody researching on this will be benefited immensely. And this is an introspection. When we talk about others, we are required to talk about us. Thank you very much for giving this insight. Thank you, the attendees, and those who have put forward questions. Those whose questions could not be taken, I think next time you will get a priority. Everything is now road. Everybody is watching you. Don't worry. So thank you very much for this insight.
Thank you.
Thank the organizers and thank the participants and attendees. So with
Good.
this, we end this edition
Thank
of.
you. Thank you very much. I also thank all the listeners. Thank you. Bye.